Peppa Pig. The glass. One morning, Peppa went into the bathroom to brush her teeth. It was early and foggy, the light outside pale and grey. The bathroom lamp was on but dim, as if shining through mist. The mirror was fogged around the edges, but in the centre, there was a perfect clean circle, as if someone had wiped it from the inside. Peppa froze. She touched the glass with her hoof. The circle didn't smear. She looked at her reflection. It was her. But something was wrong. Her hand moved with a slight delay. The blinking was out of sync. The smile looked forced. A small, almost invisible misaligned version of herself. She stepped out without saying anything. But from that morning on, she never stayed long in the bathroom. She avoided looking in the mirror for more than a second. On the third day, she saw a crack, thin as a hair, running from the bottom corner toward the top, barely visible unless you knew it was there. She ran to get Mummy, but when they came back, the mirror was perfect again. No crack, no fog, no circle. "Must have been the steam," said Mummy. "Don't worry, sweetheart." Peppa didn't answer. The next morning, the crack was back, deeper, sharper, and the reflection was more off. Peppa twitched her ear. The reflection hesitated. She raised a brow. It copied her, but not quite right. The eyes in the mirror were emptier. That evening, Peppa returned alone. She stared into the mirror, long, still. Then she noticed the reflection shimmered, as if the glass were water and something behind it was moving. The next day, there was writing on the mirror, drawn with a fingertip from the inside. "Hello." Peppa wiped it off with shaking hooves, sat alone in her room, tried to forget. But the next morning, another word, "Let me in," then, "I'm almost out." Each morning, new phrases, each day, more cracks. Peppa hung a towel over the mirror, tried not to look at it at all, but she felt it, watching her, through fabric, through walls, through dreams. One night, she woke up. The bathroom door creaked open slowly. There was no light inside, but from within came a sound, fingers scratching glass, steady, deliberate, like someone was writing. Peppa walked to the doorway, turned on the light. The mirror read, "Now you're inside." And the cracks had formed a web. Her reflection no longer mimicked her. It just stood there, head slightly tilted, mouth half open, eyes blank, and then it smiled. Peppa screamed, ran, locked herself in her room. That night, the mirror shattered with a soft, delicate sound. In the morning, there was no sign of it, only cold air, and a thin layer of dust on the floor in the shape of tiny hoof prints. When Mummy Pig came into the bathroom, the mirror was new, no cracks, no words, spotless. But when she looked into it, the reflection blinked first, and for a split second, just behind her shoulder, appeared a second Peppa face, slightly distorted, with a stretched grin, and wide, unblinking eyes.
Peppa Pig The Mask. It began on a cold, windy day, the kind of wind that pulled at trees and scattered wet leaves across the pavement. The sky had been grey for many days, the park was empty, and the paths were soggy. Peppa and George were walking along a muddy path. Leaves stuck to their boots, and the ground squelched beneath them. Then Peppa saw a white shape lying in the grass. A mask. It lay perfectly flat, as if placed there on purpose. Not fallen, not forgotten. Face up, white, smooth, featureless. Just two dark slits for eyes, and a thin line where a mouth should be, not a smile. Peppa stopped. She bent down, touched it with her hoof. The mask was dry, not cold, as if it had been waiting for her. She pressed it to her face. The mask stuck, silently, effortlessly. At first it seemed like a game, but the mask wouldn't come off. Her hooves slid along the surface, finding no edge, no straps, no seams, nothing. She tugged, pulled harder. It didn't move. The mask had become part of her face. When they returned home, no one reacted, or maybe no one wanted to. The family acted as though nothing had changed, too calm, too quiet. Peppa sat at the dinner table, but her voice sounded muffled, like it was coming through glass. No one looked directly at her. The next day, the mirror behaved oddly. When Peppa turned her head, the reflection lagged behind. When she raised her hoof, the motion was off, as if someone inside the mirror was trying to mimic her but not quite managing. By the third day, she could barely feel her face. The mask didn't press, didn't itch. It simply was still, silent. She tried to remember her old appearance, but the image blurred, like looking through foggy water. Her toys felt unfamiliar. The room looked wrong. Even her favorite blanket smelled different. Her clothes didn't fit right. Everything rubbed, tugged, shifted. She no longer felt at home in her own home. Time passed strangely, day after day, but it meant nothing. The house grew quieter, as if it were absorbing sound. Mummy and Daddy rarely spoke. They were present but distant and fading. Peppa began to hear whispering, not from outside, from within. A whisper without breath, without tone, repeating again and again, "You are the mask. You are me. You were." On the fourth day, the photographs changed. Faces faded. First George, then Daddy, then Peppa herself. The places where eyes and smiles used to be became pale, empty spots. Sometimes the mask itself changed, subtly, narrower, smoother, as if it was adjusting. Each time she looked in the mirror, she saw something unfamiliar, something staring back at her from the shadows, always silent. On the fifth day, the room had changed. No windows, walls blank like paper. The air was heavy, like she'd slept for too long. She woke up and didn't recognize anything. Nothing felt familiar. No toys, no books, no sound. In the middle of the floor lay the mask, dry, clean, and no longer on her. She couldn't remember who she was, didn't know why she stood up, didn't feel her own face. In the mirror across the room stood something that resembled Peppa, but the eyes were hollow, and inside them, silence. Peppa was gone. Only the shell remained, only the mask remained, waiting for a new face, a new game. Since then, some days, along the damp paths near the park, the mask can be seen again, lying neatly, dry, clean, and if anyone picks it up, they may hear a soft whisper from within. Peppa Pig Red Sky. One morning, Peppa woke up without knowing what had disturbed her. The alarm hadn't rung, no one had called her, but something felt wrong. She sat up in bed. Her room was flooded with light, but it wasn't warm or golden. It was dark red, heavy, like the glow of a lamp hidden behind thick fabric, as if the entire world beyond the window had changed. Peppa walked toward the curtain, reached out, but stopped. On the floor just in front of the window lay a crumpled note, its corners bent, the paper creased as if someone had thrown it long ago and it had been waiting ever since, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "Don't look out the window," written hastily, the letters trembling. Peppa turned around. Everything in the room was as usual, same toys, same bedspread, but it all seemed just a little darker, as if the world had been shifted half a step to the side. She stepped into the hallway. The walls looked grayish. The air smelled like dust. Downstairs, Mummy and Daddy were sitting at the table, silent. Daddy held a newspaper but wasn't reading. Mummy stared into her cup as if looking down a deep well. "Good morning," Peppa said. No answer. "What's wrong with the sky? Why is everything so red?" Mummy lifted her head, slowly. Her smile was almost normal, but her eyes didn't move, as if she had forgotten how. "And where's George?" Still silence. A slight creak from Daddy's chair. He didn't move. Peppa ran upstairs. George's bed was perfectly made, pillow smoothed, blanket tucked. On the sheet, another note. He looked. Just 2 words. But she understood. The bedroom window was sealed from the inside, dark grey tape, crisscrossed. Behind the glass, the red light pressed in. Thick and still, like a fog inside a windowless room. It didn't flicker, it didn't move. It just existed, and it felt alive. Peppa peeked into the hallway again. The red light had grown stronger, but gave off no warmth. It didn't illuminate, it swallowed whatever it touched. She went back to the kitchen. Her parents were frozen. Mummy's spoon trembled at the edge of her cup, but her hand was locked in place. "Why aren't you talking?" Peppa asked. No reply. On the far wall, a crack appeared, barely visible at first. then slowly growing, as if something behind the wall was scratching from the inside, deliberate, steady. A faint hiss spread across the floorboards. That evening, the house fell deeper into silence. Even the clocks had stopped. Mummy didn't blink. Daddy didn't breathe, yet his chest continued to rise and fall like someone pretending to be alive. Peppa sat in her room, on the floor, a new note. "Don't open your eyes." She squeezed them shut, tight, but still she could see the red glow through her eyelids. Footsteps, soft hooves, moving slowly through the hallway. Carefully, they stopped at her door. "Peppa," whispered a voice, childlike, a little like George's, but hollow inside. "You want to look, don't you?" She kept her eyes closed. The next morning never came. The light remained the same. Red, constant, no Mummy, no Daddy, no George. The house was empty. Only the faint rustling in the corners and the echo of her own footsteps remained. On the kitchen table sat one final note. "Now you're alone. Don't look up. Ever." She lasted one day, then another. Then she lost track. One day, Peppa stood up, walked to the window, slowly peeled off the tape, strip by strip. Behind the glass, not a street, not the sky, something red, vast, shapeless, and within it, an eye, enormous, alive, unlike anything she'd ever seen. It stared straight at her, and Peppa couldn't look away. The eye was too close, too bright, too correct. She's no longer visible in the house, but if you stand quietly in front of the window long enough, you might catch a reflection, small, childlike, with eyes wide open, eyes that never blink again.
Peppa Pig, The Door to Darkness. The day was gloomy and quiet. The wind rustled the trees outside, and the sky was covered with thick gray clouds. Peppa and George were playing in their room, building a tall tower out of blocks. The house felt especially cozy until it started to get dark. When Mummy Pig called them for dinner, Peppa stood up and accidentally knocked over the tower, sending the blocks tumbling to the floor. George whined in frustration, but Peppa wasn't paying attention anymore. She was staring at the corner of the room. There, where there had always been just a wall, now stood a door that had never been there before. It was tall, old, with a black handle. It looked out of place, as if it didn't belong in their house. Maybe Mummy and Daddy built a new storage closet, Peppa thought. But the idea sent a strange chill down her spine. George, forgetting about the fallen tower, also noticed the door and pressed himself against Peppa. Peppa took a step forward. The door was closed, but a cold draft seeped from the gap beneath it. She slowly reached out and touched the handle. It was freezing. And then the door creaked open slightly. Just a tiny bit, but it was enough. From the darkness inside came a soft rustling sound. Peppa and George froze, listening. No light, no voices. Just a faint scratching noise, like something in the shadows was dragging its claws across the floor. Peppa quickly pulled her hoof away. George gripped her dress tightly. And then the door started opening wider. Creak! The darkness behind it was too deep, unnatural, swallowing up all the light. Peppa instinctively stepped back. Then it appeared. Out of the blackness, a hoof slid into view. It looked like hers, but too long, with thin fingers instead of rounded edges. Then a second hoof emerged, and then a face peeked out. It was exactly like Peppa's, but its eyes were pitch black, empty, and its mouth— the mouth slowly stretched into an unnatural, wide grin. Peppa screamed and grabbed George's hoof. She bolted toward the hallway door, but then the light flickered. For a split second, everything was swallowed by total darkness, and when the light returned, the door was gone. All that remained was a blank wall, as if it had never existed. George whimpered, clutching Peppa's arm. She breathed heavily, eyes fixed on the spot where the door had been. Everything looked normal, but Peppa knew one thing for certain. It was still here, somewhere, watching.
Peppa Pig The Box. It happened on a grey day. Rain drizzled over the garden and the grass glistened with drops. Peppa and George were playing near a tree when they saw it. A box, old, dusty, unmarked. It stood directly on the ground as if it had just appeared. "Look, George!" Peppa exclaimed. "What's that?" They approached it carefully. The box was light, almost empty. Peppa picked it up and something inside rustled faintly. They brought it home and placed it in the corner of the room next to their toys. When Mummy saw the box, she frowned. "Where did you find that?" "It came by itself," Peppa answered. Mummy looked at the box for another moment, then turned away without saying anything. The next morning the box had changed. Inside was a small toy car, red, shiny, brand new, like it had just come from a store. George picked it up and quickly pulled his hoof away. The car was ice cold, as if it had been buried in snow. They decided to keep it, just a toy, probably. On the second day there was a doll inside the box, tiny, wearing a gray dress. Its bead-like eyes pointed in different directions. When Peppa picked it up, the doll shivered slightly, as if something had sighed inside it. Peppa quickly placed it on the shelf. The doll stood there, motionless, but at night, Peppa could swear its head had turned ever so slightly toward her. On the third night, Peppa heard a rustling sound. She woke up and saw that the box was open. A sheet of paper was sticking out. She got up and walked closer. On the paper was a photograph, their house, but the windows were black voids, and 3 faceless figures stood by the door, just shadows. On the 4th day, one of Peppa's drawings disappeared from the wall. Then George's dinosaur toy was gone. They searched everywhere. There was no trace, and George whispered, "The box took it." The house began to change. Lights flickered. Mirrors grew cloudy. Shadows lingered in the hallways where there had been none during the day. Peppa tried to tell Daddy. He laughed. "What box, Peppa? We don't have a box." But there was fear in his eyes. On the 5th night, the box was standing right next to Peppa's bed. Inside was a doorknob, exactly like the one on their front door, only dirty and cold. Peppa ran to the hallway. The door was really broken. It could no longer be closed, and beyond the threshold stood the night, and the wind carried with it the sound of soft, dragging footsteps. The 6th day, Peppa looked into the box. Inside was a drawing, one she hadn't made. It showed her, but the arms were too long, the head tilted at a strange angle, and the eyes, they stared directly at her. Underneath the drawing, scratched into the paper, were the words, "You're almost ready." That night, Peppa did not sleep. She sat and stared at the box. From inside, there came a light tapping, as if fingers were drumming against the inside walls. Then a rustle, then breathing. She shut her eyes tight. On the 7th night, the box was empty. Only at the very bottom, in the dust, scratched faintly, were the words, "Now you are part of me." Peppa looked around. The house was different, the hallways, long and empty, the windows, black and dead, and in the mirrors, instead of her reflection, stood the box, closer, each time, even closer. And in the silence, Peppa heard, "Just a little more, and you'll forget who you were."